Bonsoir, je suis désolé, but my French is really not good enough to do this in French. I don't know, I love being here on holidays, but I spend all the time eating the good food and never learning the language. I don't know. So I was told I have about 20 minutes to tell you everything about the IoT and business process management. And I was also told that half of the people here more coming from a business point of view and the other half more from an IT point of view. So I will try to also accept this challenge in English. So let's see how this goes. Plus, this is kind of like the last block in the afternoon, so I have to try to keep you awake. So I'm sure you've seen these numbers about the Internet of Things, right? I actually think there is a pub somewhere in San Francisco where the marketing manager of Cisco, of Gartner, and of IDC meet about once a month, and then one of them comes out, goes home and thinks, man, I have to come up with bigger numbers about the Internet of Things, right? So just looking at this, I mean, kind of like the standards, 50 billion connected devices by 2020, 7.1 trillion IoT solutions revenue predicted by IDC. So I think one question is, where do all these numbers actually come from, right? And I think it has become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy based on the fact that a number of things are actually coming together, okay? And I think one of them is actually that we can really now see how cost for communication in the next 10 years will be lowered to a level where pretty much my kids' toys will be connected to the IoT, right? For better or worse. And I think this is really fueling this discussion about the IoT. But the interesting question really is, where do we find business models for the IoT, right? So these are, do you want to do a quick sum up?
Yes, oui. Donc un point essentiel, pourquoi est-ce qu'il y a tant d'objets connectés? C'est que le coût de connexion d'un objet est très faible, là au-dessous $1. Et ce fait, en réalité, a une influence extrêmement importante sur les modèles business et les operating models. Donc c'est quelques exemples, je pense, qui vont être présentés.
Thank you. So there are a lot of different examples discussed at the moment. So I put some on the slide. My favorite one for all drivers of the Mercedes A-Class is actually solar roadways. It's basically intelligent tiles for building roads that use solar energy to get powered. Okay, and think, for example, you have a big city in Paris, right, where all the commuters come in the morning, and then at lunchtime you want to switch everything around. So you want to use multiple lanes to actually direct the traffic out of the city. Okay, so with these you can actually do this. And by night, they can even highlight if an elk is crossing the road. I don't know how many elks you have in Paris, but so I think that's a nifty invention.
Oui, donc, un exemple d'utilisation dans lequel on peut changer la direction des lanes, alors ça je m'en rappelle plus, enfin, pour que dans le sens, je dirais, de trafic, on ait beaucoup plus de routes disponibles, et on peut même je dirais, éclairer certains objets comme des élans. Et, on se demandait combien il y avait d'élans à Paris, mais vraiment pas beaucoup.
So, why is a big company like Bosch actually so interested in the Internet of Things? Okay, just looking at our products, about half of our revenue comes from automotive components, and alone in this space we see a lot of interesting things happening, right? 360-degree parking, autonomous driving, car-to-car, car-to-X, etc. Okay, all of these things have a lot to do with the Internet of Things. There are many other examples. The Internet of Things connected refrigerator, I still don't believe. When I started with Bosch, I also did not believe the Internet of Things connected tightening tool that you see on this slide, because I always thought when I'm at home and I do some DIY, right? So I don't know, I do something in the garden or so, I have enough people telling me how to do my work, and I have my family telling me how to do this at home. I don't want my power tool even to tell me how to do this better, right? Turns out this is actually a very interesting industrial case, and I'll talk about this in a minute.
Donc, des tas d'objets différents peuvent être connectés. Donc, vu d'un particulier, on ne veut probablement pas se faire dicter sa quantité totale de travail par un système. Par contre, on verra plus tard que dans des applications industrielles, je pense que vous faites référence à la maintenance industrielle, ça peut être très utile.
Right. So, many different interesting areas. I work for Bosch Software Innovations. We're a small entity in the larger Bosch group. We focus on industry, mobility, energy, smart home, and smart city. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why this is important for a large product manufacturer. Because in the past, when we produced components, and we've been doing this for 125 years, the best thing that could happen to us was after we shipped a product, we never hear back from it. Because if a company like Bosch hears back, that typically means product recall. Okay, so that's a bad thing to have. So that's why process management, TQM, etc. are very important topics to us. But what we see is that this is going to change in the future, because the IoT is all about connected products. Okay, so being able to actually stay in touch with your customer after the product has been delivered to the customer, okay, which has a fundamental impact on the features of the product, but also how, as a manufacturer, you really look at asset lifecycle management. It also means that as a manufacturer, we really have to become more so as an operator, okay, because you need to operate these things out there in the field. The benefit is that you get constant product feedback, which helps you to enhance your products. You get product feedback, which means you can improve your customer services, and you might even be able to sell additional digital services. Okay, so that was a lot, but maybe you can summarize it in a nutshell.
Dans le passé, quand Bosch entendait parler d'un produit délivré à un client, c'était pas une bonne nouvelle, parce qu'en général, c'était parce que le produit était défectueux. Maintenant, avec l'objet connecté, les feedbacks sont constants, et ces feedbacks sur l'utilisation du produit peuvent créer de l'information que Bosch peut ensuite exploiter pour créer de la valeur à la fois pour améliorer les produits et les services, mais aussi pour mieux servir le client et monter de nouveaux services.
So, in the German industry over the last 4 or 5 years, this topic of Industry 4.0 came up. And as you know, within the European community, I think that the German manufacturing sector is one of the strong parts actually supporting the European economy at the moment. And so obviously does the French. I'm not sure if there's a French Industry 4.0 equivalent, but German politicians very much supported this initiative, okay, coming up with different use cases to utilize digitalization, utilize IoT in the context of manufacturing. And today specifically, of course, is about integration between things and processes. Okay, so that's one thing that we see that really has to grow together, because if we start rolling out connected products, okay, we see that this is going to have a huge impact on processes, and that has to be managed efficiently.
Donc en Allemagne, la combinaison de l'Internet des objets et des processus pour réinventer la manière dont tout ce qui est industriel fonctionne est sur l'agenda du pays et des hommes politiques. Donc ceci va changer la manière dont on produit, on fabrique dans les années qui viennent en Allemagne. Et la question c'était, est-ce que vous avez ce type d'initiative en France?
Sorry, I hope you managed to bring this across more politically correct than I just tried. Thank you. So, one of the things that we've learned is it is actually pretty pointless to just connect your products to the internet. Nothing's going to happen. What you really need to build new business models is to actually connect your products to the internet and then build services on top. Okay, so it's really the combination of connectivity and services that creates new business models. So one example that I always like to use is the Bosch eCall service, which basically is a sensor embedded in a car and connectivity to the airbag that basically gives me information whether there was an accident, and that's then routed to a call center where we can pick this up, right? And we have a process in the call center that basically helps evaluating the severeness of the problem, potentially involving a call center agent, making sure actually that we find out the language of the car driver and make sure that the call center agent answers in the right language. Or if it's really severe, we automatically direct an emergency service to the suspected site of the accident. Okay, so this is actually a pretty big service for just one sensor and a small piece of connectivity, but it has huge value add. So at the moment, for example, Daimler is using this as a differentiation, and we believe it will become part of the EU legislation to make this available for all cars in the EU.
Alors, juste connecter des objets à l'Internet n'apporte pas de valeur en soi. Ce qu'il faut, c'est créer des services à partir de l'information que cette combinaison permet. Et un exemple de service, c'est un service dans lequel, si votre auto est connectée, s'il y a un accident, vous pouvez tout de suite créer un service qui va accélérer finalement l'arrivée des secours et même pouvoir vous fournir une voiture de remplacement ou trouver une solution au problème logistique. Donc c'est bien ces services qui sont importants et qu'il faut imaginer.
Great. So what we found out is really you need to support 4 perspectives for this, right? So there's the perspective of the thing. Well, actually nobody talks about things. People talk about devices, about assets, right? But it happens to be called Internet of Things. Then, of course, the enterprise function for the service, which typically is process-oriented, right? Then, of course, the interface of the user to the asset and to the processes provided by the enterprise. And, again, the integration with the partner. And as much as we talk about, latest technology, MQTT, what have you, in the IoT, I saw in your presentation earlier on, you had the dirty word on it, EDI, electronic data interchange. It's not going to go away, right? So it's going to be part of this whole formula, right? So these things really need to grow together in order to support this ecosystem. And I think this slide speaks for itself. So let me do the next 2-3 slides, otherwise we have no chance halfway being on time. Couple of examples. So this is actually in the area of e-mobility. Not there yet, but of huge strategic importance. This is a joint venture between Daimler, BMW, Siemens, and most of the major European utilities to set up a roaming service for electric vehicles. Okay, so that if I drive my electric vehicle from Berlin, where I live, to Hamburg, where I don't maybe have a contract with the local utility, I can still charge up my car, okay, and then the Hamburg utility deals with the Berlin utility to make sure that it gets on a single bill. Okay, so sounds like a process to me. Next example, a little bit more out there in the area of manufacturing. Okay, so this is about the integration of handheld industrial tools, right, like this little thing you see there in the corner. And I said early on I didn't believe in IoT-enabled power tools. This is actually a professional tool. Cost is about 8,000 euro. It has an onboard computer that can control a multi-phase tightening process. Imagine an aircraft that has 400,000 security-relevant tightenings, right? And if only one of them in the wrong place isn't tightened properly, something happens like with large airline 3 years ago where the window in the cockpit goes off and 3 people die because they fly out. Okay? So you want to make sure that the right tightening program for the right connection is always there, on the right place, in the right time, and that you can also create a quality profile of each of these tightenings. Okay? So this we actually want to advance to a level where we can actually integrate this with a complete virtual model of the tools, the factory environment, and the products we're working on to automatically reconcile the 3D model in the PLM with the actual task, okay, to make sure that we have the right work instruction from the PLM work downloaded onto the tool in time, okay, and then create a quality lot that can be written back to the 3D PLM model to really make sure that all of these 400,000 relevant connections are recorded, okay. So I think that's another really good case for using IoT in an industrial environment. And I don't envy you for this now.
Donc, Dirk a juste présenté quelques exemples de solutions qui associent de manière étroite la personne qui va utiliser l'outil lui-même, l'outil qui va être connecté, et l'entreprise qui va pouvoir finalement délivrer un service à travers ses employés en utilisant cet outil ou ces outils avec l'aide d'un réseau de partenaires qui vont fournir des services. Donc c'est vraiment, je dirais, la réflexion sur ces écosystèmes qui permettent de penser des nouveaux services innovants qui vont amener des gains en termes de productivité, de qualité de service, parce que on va faire en sorte que le bon outil soit disponible à la bonne personne au bon moment, et on aura prévu si, en termes de maintenance, il y avait des choses à faire avant pour qu'il n'y ait pas, par exemple, de temps d'arrêt vu à la disposition de l'outil en question.
Thanks for
I hope I've translated correctly.
It sounds very good, very professional to me. Okay, so I tried to do the next 4 slides in 2 minutes, and then you have 30 seconds. 4 key challenges, right? So first of all, you need to integrate these things. Second of all, you need to manage the data that either needs to be deployed on the things or that comes back from the things, like the quality lot I was mentioning earlier on. You need to be able to manage the events that come from the things. Okay, so for example, in the solution I just mentioned, certain tools can only be used in a certain area. So I want to have a geofence around the particular aircraft, for example, I'm working on. And if I leave the geofence, an alarm needs to be raised. And this alarm needs to be processed. And that's actually the 4th challenge. Okay, so how does the process look like that reacts to this event? Okay, should I switch off the tool? Should I send a text message to the supervisor, etc., etc.? Okay, and this is pretty much what we do. A little bit of self-advertisement is okay, right? This is what we do at Bosch Software Innovation. So we have products to help you addressing all of these challenges on the software level. And now I will listen very carefully.
Alors, comme l'outil est relié à l'entreprise, si l'outil, par exemple, va dans une zone où il n'est pas autorisé, ça va générer un événement qui doit être pris en compte dans le processus, et peut-être qu'on doit réagir auprès de l'opérateur qui a emmené l'outil là où il ne fallait pas. Et une des choses que Bosch offre, c'est finalement le service qui va permettre de gérer ces alertes et de gérer les process en question. Donc d'améliorer l'efficacité de l'entreprise.
Merci beaucoup. Okay, let's just do a time change. Okay, not looking so good. So then quickly, how do we actually get there? Okay, so what we've seen is that you somehow need to be able to get from a theoretical model down to an actual digital model. One key question is, how fine-grained should this digital model actually be? Okay. Then the next question is, what inception points do you actually have to create this digital model, right? So this simplistic example, soccer. How do you use a sensor to find out if a goal was scored, right? Do you use a noise sensor, right? If, for example, you know, Paris plays at home in Paris and the noise is really positive, that means that Paris scored a goal? Or how do you reconstruct this event to build up this model? And then how can you actually then add processes to this model to actually implement the logic that you want to implement? And to make it a bit more interesting for you, I'll do 4 more slides in one go. So what we discovered is that there's a pattern that we call process to device and device to process that needs to be supported by this solution. Okay, so think of an solution that supports security for malls and airports and things like this. Okay, so you have different sensors, and the first sensor tells you there was a suspicious movement. Okay, so this triggers a process in the backend which tells an operator to zoom a camera to the point where the noise was and look into it. Okay, no problem here. So next thing that happens is the noise gets really loud. So the system gets nervous and says, okay, forget about the operator, send the security guard to the mall where this is happening because this is urgent. Okay, so the poor security guys, right, you know these guys, big torch, he goes into the building and tries to find out what's happening. Next thing, actually you have another sensor that tells you, no, there's a fire going on. Okay, so what do you actually do? You need to abort the previous process, you need to get the security guard out of the building as soon as possible and start a different process that actually alerts the fire brigades. Okay, so key question here is, how do you correlate all of these different events and how do you map them to processes? And how does this map to your digital model? And are we still talking about traditional process management here, or are we now in the realms of adaptive case management, as I would argue in this case?
Donc là, c'est le premier pattern. Donc, pattern en français, c'est, disons, une conception, on dit patron de conception, j'ai une traduction, du device au process. Donc il y a des changements d'état qui arrivent dans la vraie vie. Certains de ces changements d'état sont des événements qui doivent être interprétés donc, et corrélés avec un événement dans le modèle de process. Et le process va peut-être aller sur la prochaine étape, et j'imagine qu'on va voir maintenant le pattern inverse du processus vers le device.
Good. So, in addition to the processes that actually support the service provided by the IT solution, you also have to look at this from an asset lifecycle management point of view, because these processes also will change in an IT world. Okay, so think of the sales process, which needs to incorporate things like commissioning. So the first time somebody buys an IT-enabled device and switches the device on at home, okay, there is typically a registration process now involved that you need to support. Okay, and then you operate. Okay, so that means you get a lot of data from your devices. But what do you actually do? Is your support organization, are your processes in your support organization prepared to actually act on this data? Okay, so in our experience, this can mean a big change process, for example, in your support organization, up to like 3-4 years before you can really fully leverage these new capabilities in your organization.
Oui, l'autre perspective qu'il faut regarder, c'est la vie complète de l'actif qui va depuis sa fabrication jusqu'à son support. Et là, on est sur des cycles de vie qui peuvent durer quelques années. Donc les utilisations qu'on peut avoir de certains des objets, on en connaît certaines aujourd'hui, mais ça va se développer encore plus dans le futur, puisque c'est des données que dans 2-3 ans qu'on pourra tirer toute la valeur de cette information acquise, l'utilisation en particulier.
And if we had more time, we could spend a lot of time discussing, for example, what the nature of these processes is. Are they more structured processes made for automation, etc.? So traditional BPM, or are these processes, like in the example earlier on, which require a lot of ad hoc decision making, a lot of correlation, etc.? So are there more adaptive case management type of processes, and how do they play together? That's not an easy task. I've been working together with some colleagues and actually documenting this. We've written a book called Enterprise BPM, which now is available in English. Anybody interested in doing a French translation, please send me an email. And originally, so we've set up something which I guess is a little bit similar to what you're doing here. We call this the Enterprise BPM Alliance, which basically is developing a methodology, a very hands-on methodology that tries to bridge the gap between, what we call the gap between Six Sigma and XPDL. Okay, so try to go from a high-level strategic thinking about processes to the actual implementation. Okay, And in the past, this methodology has been more used in banking, insurance, etc. But we're now also more and more applying this to these IoT type of cases. And that's really all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Donc, juste le mot de conclusion, vous avez créé une méthode et un livre qui permettent d'aller de la vision un peu stratégique du processus, Lean Six Sigma, à son implémentation telle qu'on l'a vu aujourd'hui. Donc, s'il y a un volontaire parmi vous pour traduire ce livre, il faut écrire un mail à Alder. Maintenant, nous allons passer. The deal is that you translate that one in German.
Okay, it's a deal. They call it quid pro quo, right?